Well, welcome everybody to Dr. Kicklighter's class, The High Middle Ages. So let me guess, you've all signed in. I know you've been good. And I know that you've all turned off your cell phones. Yeah, I knew you didn't. All right, so let's turn off those cell phones. Also, hello to everybody on Zoom. Hello, Zoom. Well, today, Dr. Kicklighter is going to be talking about feudalism. And feudalism is really the key social structure of the High Middle Ages. Now, as his vassal, I need to make sure that I am absolutely on my best behavior because he could declare me, what's that word?
Consummation.
Contumacious. Yes, indeedy. And guess what happens? Guess what happens when you get declared that? They take your fief away. Now, my fief isn't particularly great. It really just consists of that chair, and it doesn't even come with any serfs to maintain it. But it's my fief, and I feel like I'm attached to it. So I don't really want to lose it. So I solemnly swear to pay homage, well, at least for the day, to my liege lord, Sir Joseph of Ali.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I like that. I like this hierarchical approach in Holly. Yes. The topic, generally speaking, for this term is the High Middle Ages. And we always think about that word high. What does that exactly mean? But yes, though we have other meanings for it. But in this case, historians seem to have decided at one point, not anymore, but at one point, that this was the greatest part of the Middle Ages. Because after all, if you're talking about 1,000 years, you have to do some subdivisions. And you are mostly aware, I suspect, that in the previous class, we talked about the early Middle Ages, and now we have to move on. And rather than calling it, I guess, the Middle Ages, because of course, in the spring, preview of coming attraction, we will have the late Middle Ages. So it's early and high and late. Some people, if you have to go to a medieval history conference or get captured or, abused, and you have to sit there, they can have debates about whether to call it high or not. But for our purposes, we'll let that go. And we will also realize that when we talk about this feudal society, we are talking about a minority, a very, very small minority of the privileged, people who are not exactly the masses. Despite the fact the masses are very, very significant in this period. Now, you may need to tell me how do I switch it? I'm sorry, Frank. Oh, it's that one again.
There you go. And there you go.
Okay, so is that going to be the way it works?
Yes, sir.
Every time.
Just click that.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry, they didn't tell me it's a new device, I believe.
Yeah.
So the reality after Charlemagne, in terms of the empire, this is like, how did it all turn out? You'll remember 800 and how happy we were that Christmas. I remember when he was crowned emperor and we were all so happy and it seemed like good times are ahead. Well, it didn't last. I waited to tell you that until after the holidays because I thought you would be so down you wouldn't come back. But just think about, it seemed like a good idea at the time for him to become Roman emperor, and it worked out pretty well for a while. He started using the title, although you remember he was a bit petulant about it because the Pope had given it to him. So he said, really, this is mine and it has nothing to do with you, Pope. And so he crowned his own son emperor before he died, just to make sure the Pope didn't get credit for it. So I'd call that petulance, wouldn't you? So it's a truth that he had only one son to survive him. And that's just very fortuitous because, believe me, he was quite fertile. So he had a variety of children. There was no problem there. But they all died before him as far as sons. So this was Louis. And even in Charlemagne's latter years before Louis, and he crowned him, by the way, before he died, just to make sure no Pope tried to pull in. Although after he died, Louis had the Pope crown him, I guess, for a sort of insurance policy to make sure God put the stamp on him. But even in Charlemagne's last years, it was clear that the empire was on shaky grounds from outsiders, the lack of naval defenses, and more or less understanding that after Charlemagne's time, that his son, who is known to history as Louis the Pious. Now, it's not bad to be called pious. I mean, if you say it nicely, I mean, some people are sarcastic. Oh, they're so pious. But I know. And you say, well, that's ugly. But Louis the Pious was very, let me use another word. You'll love this one. Punctilious. This is not a thank you. I try. To be punctilious is not considered, I think, particularly nice, but Louis had great churchmanship, and he was very unusual for a man in that day, faithful to his wife, or wives, I should say. He'd had two, but that was unusual. But meanwhile, he had problems. And I thought about this old series, and some of you may remember it's called My Three Sons. I thought about that when I was thinking about my lecture today, because I was thinking about, you remember Fred McMurray? He was so nice. And those boys were so well behaved. And they loved their dad. And remember Bub? And well, I won't get romantic with you, but I will just say that is not always true. I'm just telling you, sometimes, have you ever heard of Cain and Abel? I'm just saying, sometimes fraternalism is not all that we would like it to be. And that's the case of the three sons of Louis. They were, in this case, already thinking, well, I know you're not dead yet, Dad, but I'm pretty well ready for my share of the loot, meaning part of your empire. I mean, it's like an amazing idea that during the years of Louis's reign, he would have to deal with these people. Plus, Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens that we can see on the map. That is to say, Louis had good reason to be pious, because I would think I must be the latest version of Job, because it seems like everything you can think of in terms of bad luck Louis had. And then you've got the image of your father, Charles the Great, saying, what's your problem? I mean, if your father is Charlemagne, I mean, like, it's very, very difficult indeed for Louis the Pious. So all of these groups, outside invaders, and of course, their own, shall we say, officials, nobles are saying, if you want my support, now I want to support you, but remember that inevitable question, what's it worth to you? And you say, but that doesn't seem like a caring and loving response. But of course it isn't. We understand how people are. They are going to take advantage of situations, are they not? So obviously, in every case, we see that breakup of authority because we can't enforce it. And they're fighting amongst themselves, and these people say, well, we'll support you, but we have the following demands. We have the following requirements. So that is the idea of what is going to cause this change that we call the feudal world, because the feudal world did not exist. This, I think, is unique for this particular period. And I think that's a very important point that we bear in mind. Incidentally, these are the three kingdoms that would have consisted of the territory that Charlemagne had had and Louis had sort of ruled. It always looks so neat and clean when you see it on the map, doesn't it? And you're thinking, what about all those folks? Do they know they're in the yellow? I'm not so sure about that. I would call this theoretical. Theoretically, these are the parts, but you think, see Charles and Lothar, and you think, did he really go that far down in Italy? Well, sort of, but it's like that's what they claimed. And that Treaty of Verdun, yes, we know that's Eastern France now. You've been there, I suspect. Many people have. So that area of Eastern France was where they got together. Lothar became the emperor, and the younger brothers said, we love you so much, we want to just do everything you say because you're older, and let's just have a big fraternal hug. People lie to you. I'm telling you, there is mendacity all about. Let's just remember that. Yeah. So we see that then, and you're thinking, but this couldn't be that simple. Oh, no. Next map is, yeah. See, I wanted to make sure that you would not think that these simple, nice maps are reality, because the reality is that even after Charlemagne, during Louis' time, the Vikings are coming south into these areas, and Vikings could be coming, Danes, Swedes, or what we call Norwegians. We think of them as these lovely people in Oslo, and and I don't think that's the image that they would have, their ancestors. And of course, what we call Saracens, another term that Westerners use for Muslims from Northern Africa and Spain. And of course, we never forget our friends in Budapest, the Hungarians or Magyars from the east.
Novel taking place in Hungary, and the GY is pronounced a J to them.
Is that right?
Yeah, any Hungarian word. They don't call themselves Hungarian either, just Magyars.
No. Well, I've seen it on the postal stamps. The word Magyar post. I mean, it's still alive, even though they're not really Magyars. But because the population is changed, but it's so interesting, isn't it, to think about that. All of these different folks are creating a situation that I would call chaotic, bedlam, and again, many words that you can think of yourselves. And all of this is trying to get you and me to appreciate what I would consider chaos. If you're trying to say, I'm the descendant of Charlemagne, or like the student said to me, do you know who I am? Do you know my, and I'm still quivering 20 years later. but that's the idea of it. It's like, so I mean, why do I care about that? That's the idea though about the situation at that time. So it's getting to be on the very basic level. I'm not saying that Lothair or Charles or any of these people didn't have some clout, some significance, but it's definitely on the decline, and they're thinking, I wonder what grandpa would think. You know, it's like you probably don't want to have to think about that, because if you were, God, could you imagine Charlemagne, your grandfather, and the whole thing seems to be going to heck? And how do you feel? How do you say, I'm sorry I let you down? It's like that. But there's a lot of fighting and confusion. So what does it mean? Well, it means that if there's going to be any order of authority, it's got to be on the local level. And from local level seems to come what is commonly called, and you see it in I think they probably have that section of textbook, quote unquote, feudalism. And again, if you go to a history conference, you'll hear people debate the use of that word, as they do about all isms, because it all seems too simple, but it's, I suppose, useful for trying to see it as some sort of systematic way to understand the past. But we understand that there is not any sort of magic system of feudalism, and somebody comes along and says, now I want everybody to go feudal. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. It's sort of like a way that they try to bring some order to their world. The word feudal, of course, comes from the word for fief, the holding of land. And a lot of what we know about this, and much of what I'll have to tell you, comes from feudal legal systems. And you say, lawyers? Oh, yeah. Eventually, by the 12th century, legal authorities will try to pull this together and make it into a legal code. And if their ancestors could have come back from either heaven or purgatory, hell, wherever it was, they might have said, wait a minute, we didn't have that. Well, but you're not there now, because the legal code is going to set this up as the way it is. But you understand that they have very much a do-it-yourself world, don't they? Because these things just sort of emerge and everybody says, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I just want you to understand that, because if it sounds like somebody had a magic wand and said, you know, I'm going to tell you about feudalism now. I have all this. I'm ready to lay it out. So this will be on the file. You have to know this. But you understand it. That's just not that's just not the way it works. The idea, and again, it's very upper class, isn't it? Because these folks, what would you say, 90% or not of the population would have been involved in some way with agriculture. And I don't mean agribusiness, okay? I mean, they are working, okay? And they are poor as can be. So this is what today we call the privileged. those who have authority, control, some based on their place, others on their occupation. Because many so-called knights, so Galahad notwithstanding, are people who had just sort of elevated thugs. I mean, they were not, yeah. It's not like they came, had the little lace, they went to harpsichord concerts. No, different time, another world. But they have a role to play. I did put them at the bottom, and the counts and dukes, of course, those particular titles have to do, of course, with the lands over which they rule. They lived in castles. Many of you have visited castles and you think, I wouldn't like to live in a castle. Well, I wouldn't either, because they're not comfortable and can be very dirty too, and unpleasant, to say the least. So, but they represent power, control, and all the rest in the counties and the duchies, as they say. And of course, we always know the church is involved. You always remember we've got those three groups, don't we? We've got the kings, and we've got the Christian leaders. And they, as we are going to see, are very, very important in this society. The bishops of the church, I guess you would call them the rulers, and the abbots, the religious figures who are very, very important. And the abbeys are like great estates for the church. Now, here is where the origins come from. The idea being that the local officials simply take over. And I was thinking today, because of how cold it is, I was thinking about the Persian satraps. I've got a very disturbed mind, as you can tell. You think, why Persian satraps? Well, you remember in Herodotus, the Greek historian, he always spoke like we used to with the post office. No matter what the weather, we will be out there on the roads carrying out the great king's mandates, all for a postage stamp. Yeah, be thankful. So, you understand that that's what these folks had done in the day. That is Charlemagne's day. But then when a strong ruler is no longer around, the dukes and counts and others simply usurp the authority for themselves. And you know what they want to do. Then they want Junior to get it after them. That's always coming along. They never say, gosh, he needs to get out and do it for himself. No. There's something ugly called nepotism. I don't want you to think about it. That's a very, very bad thing, but they may even have this in Alabama. Yeah. So
Certainly have in Chicago.
I'd have one. Yeah, I would not even going there. We know about that. It's Normandy, where we all love to go, and everybody loves Normandy. Historians often say that's really where the feudal world begins. That may be a little oversimplified, but the Norsemen, they settle down there, they take over, they establish themselves, and they say to that Carolingian king, maybe not Charles the Bald, but maybe his grandson, we're here and we're taking over. And he says, we, yes, yes. And they will establish Normandy. Marrying a Carolingian daughter. I'm sure she was just thrilled. Sure. But basically, the version that's usually told is this is where it's worked out that the political, military, and land relationships come together. That all of this had existed before, but never with this particular blend. So understand that one sort of comes together. I mean, people had, fought for different people, warriors, but then the control that these people would have of the political authority, and then the use of the land to sort of compensate for your warriors, as we will see. There we go, for those who would think about on the trains and going over and however you get. I've actually been on a boat and it is not always pleasant. I can tell you, I think of other ways of going nowadays, but all of this is to say, and you see Normandy down there. And of course, then we think of 1066 and the so-called movement of the feudal lands, feudal ideals from England. From Normandy to England. Again, that's the 11th century, so that pretty well ties in with this concept that the Normans started, because the Normans are settling in what will become Normandy by the 10th century, 900s, late 900s. And then, of course, as we know from our English history, they will then go to England and they will end up going to Sicily as well. So there is great influence there. And the theory is the Normans create this feudal idea. I want to make an alert here that no one would think that everybody is going feudal. It's not like some sort of feudal fad or a chic, and it's amazing, this concept can be almost more trouble than it's worth, because you can always think of so many exceptions. And so you say, well, if we go out of Normandy and England, how feudal is it? Well, it all depends on what you mean. It doesn't, but there's no black and white in history. It's very, very difficult here. But we do have the holding of fiefs for military service. I'll grant you that. Now, the idea of the fiefs, of course, means that we got all this land and we've got plenty of folks to work on it. So why don't we then apportion out the land for so-called vassals, which actually is, I didn't know this, but I thought it was interesting, a Welsh word. And they are almost like something out of The Sopranos. Because, when you say vassals, you're thinking about somebody who's nice and yes, my lord, and all that. These people were ugly and lacked good manners. And before there were thieves, I think they were sort of hanging out in a different wing of the castle. I mean, it's like, sort of like y'all get up early and maybe have some sort of physical activities, to get ready to go. We got killing and looting this afternoon, so we got a good workout, and then we are ready, man. Who wants to kill? Yeah, I do. Yeah, that kind of thing. And that was what the term vassal meant. And then you're thinking about thieves, the idea of they got to make it a lot more polite and genteel. So now we will call them knights, and they will have these fiefs, which is like, I put these terms in quotation marks. You say gifts of land, and it's like, well, library books. We love our library books, but they're not yours. They belong to all of us. Okay. So I would hate to come to someone's house and find one that was overdue. I mean, not that you would do that. No, you would not do that. I know. You would understand it belongs to all of us. But seriously, it's like, as long as you are fighting and doing your work, your activity, you're killing and pillaging and so forth, then you have a right to your fief. But the day you turn in or submit your retirement plans, you're out of here. Okay. No golden parachute for you. Sorry. So you notice complete with serfs. I want to add, not everyone is a serf by any means. You can be a peasant and you're simply attached to that area because of the need for protection. So you choose to accept the authority of the Lord, and the Lord will basically protect you, so to speak, for a cut of whatever it is you grow. Serfs, of course, are bound to the land, so they are like the lower level of peasants. But in general, that's why I said complete with serfs. The serfs are not free to leave, and of course, but on the other hand, they are not enslaved either. Slavery did not seem to work out in this society, so they say, as it would in the classical world, because this, slavery requires that you take care of them, more or less, but serfs take care of themselves to a certain extent. So there are all kinds of levels of these mass of people who work. Now, France and England first in terms of feudal institutions, and then the empire to a lesser extent. The empire, of course, being Germany, northern Italy, and various parts of Central Europe. But that is to say that there are lots of areas that it would be hard to say if it was like the complete textbook feudal, another word I hate, feudal system, because when you go and you see that on the map and it looks so well organized, and you're thinking to yourself, could that be reality? And I think only in a textbook, because they would then put it on the, the blackboard. You remember in school, they would put it up there, and you say, wow, I don't know what you would be thinking when you were 12 or 13, and you were thinking, ma'am, is this merely theoretical, or does this, or maybe you're saying, I wonder what time lunch is? Not us, but I'm just saying. It is very hierarchical, starting, of course, as they saw it, with God's representative on earth, king, as far as lay people are concerned. The king is called suzerain, and the difference is from what we call today the sovereign. Remember when they used to call the British monarch sovereigns? I guess they don't, Charles would not be comfortable with that now, but the idea of the sovereign is that he's not merely the ultimate ruler, but he has authority over virtually everyone. The suzerain, on the other hand, which I think is derived from a French word, more or less is part of a hierarchy, the top of it. The top of the feudal heap. You've got each person in that hierarchy from step to step. We start with the suzerain, and then we go down, of course, to counts and dukes, abbots and bishops, as we'll see. And then we have the vassals. And then we're going to have what they call rear vassals. The vassals of the vassals. Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking seriously trees. I mean, we want a feudal arboretum. We can do it because it is, I mean, it can get very confusing. But you just need to know this in case you're on Jeopardy. I mean, because about like, where could this be? See, you could be a vassal and then be vassal here and then a rear vassal there, because, you know, we're always thinking about how much land can we get, because it's not like people like today. They're not going to say, oh, I think I have enough money. Nobody ever says that. More. The filth of lucre. But I know. Amen, bro. But you understand, these vassals, they want more land. So you say, but you got your nice fee, and look at all those folks just working so hard and they love you. You say, yeah, but I want more. That's just greed. I'm not here to preach them. Don't worry. So that is true. Now, we love ritual. I don't know about whether we do or not, but they certainly did in the medieval period. Part of this, and again, we talk about German, Christian, and Roman, remember? So you can see this as part German, part Christian, and part Roman. The homage from the word homo, meaning man, has to do with the just basic Lord and vassal relationship. And again, if you go to a history conference, you can hear people argue about whether that's German or whether that's Roman. Suffice it to say that these kinds of man-to-man connections are found in both societies. And when you say you become someone's man, you sort of commit yourself. And again, I'm thinking about some of those creatures on The Sopranos. I mean, and you're thinking, so you mean it would be bad if you reneged? Yes, it'd be very bad. And in this case, going to hell bad, because that's called fealty. That's where the Christians get in on the action, because by now Christianity has enough of a effect on society that in what's called fealty, they promise by God that they will be faithful to their Lord. And if you say, well, I want to be perfidious, I know, not you, but I'm just saying, if you were a faithless vessel, I feel fire, I feel burning, hell's coming for you. The idea then is you are a perjurer. Yes. And we're not giving you 6 months in orange. We are saying hellacious. Yes. So that is very, very serious, supposedly, with the local priest or whoever presiding over this. Presumably, this can't be done just lay people. This has got to be something a little grander than that, a little pomp and circumstance there. And of course, the investiture. We love the investiture. And now we can go with Elgar, the investment with the symbol of the thief, man bowing, and the kiss. So we got the whole rigmarole. Can you imagine how long all this would take? What if you were having a big group of them and next? So that is supposedly the way it was supposed to work. And boy, if you're holding, saying, I was just kidding. I'm not really going to be faithful. I'm going to be perfidious. I think there's going to be some big problems for you, but that's the idea. The kiss was to seal it. And of course, we know about Judas, so we know that sometimes people kiss and don't mean it. So that is the whole ritual behind it. And this is what they say in the law, that these steps were important. And again, who decides this? Well, I guess some board of the Medieval Bar Association had decided that we have these steps. But seriously, these are the points that are made and are considered very, very important to do it. Does that mean that every vassal and every lord did it? I doubt it, but that's what they considered to be basic. Now, notice I'd say expected and customarily. I try to give myself outwards because if somebody puts a say, did everybody do that? I'm not so sure, but the theory was, you're my vassals, and I think so much of you. And remember, if you have questions or suggestions of our Lord-vassal relationship, I welcome your, ratemylord.com or whatever it is. I mean, could you imagine? But that's the idea, that the Lord and vassal care very much about each other. It's a song, reach out and touch, that kind of thing. So, yeah. So that is the idea. And the vassals obviously love their Lord just as much as they can, in theory. You understand, this is all theoretical. They provide the military service, aid and counsel, as all that would even entail so-called hospitality, meaning that if the Lord and his retinue are in the area, you have the door open. And however long they need to come. Remember, when you think about people ask to come for the weekend and Monday comes around. Yeah, I mean, this could be it, because you're supposed to feed them. They're not saying, oh, let me pick up the tab. No, you're doing it, man. It's all free meals. all these people, and you can't say, well, I didn't know you were going to bring all these people. That's your deal, because I'm the Lord and you're not. And so all of that's the hospitality. And they would tell all kinds of stories and medieval accounts about how people could come and they could, yep, and say, just charge it. It's like, who's going to pay for all this? You are, because the Lord is above that, and you just love the Lord. Now, the scutage, a very interesting English idea that would develop. It's called a way to avoid military service, because you've got other things going on, and you say, gosh, I would love to help you out, but look at the time, it's just flying by next month. I just don't have. So how do you do it? Scutage involves some sort of monetary payment. And then you can have mercenaries. But these are developments that will come about because of a more complex society, I would think. Scutage and things of that sort. I can't imagine that would have been the early days of the feudal world. But later on, obviously, people got more complex in their relations. Look at this, for example. If you're in a conflict that is essentially defensive in nature, like you vassals are fighting because the Lord's lands have been invaded, then you were supposed to fight endlessly. I mean, like, because I'm facing enemies. However, if your Lord is going to go out and conquer somebody else's lands, then you clock in at 40 days. And I'm thinking, really? So they've got this all marked off on the calendar, and like, boy, this is just about time for me to leave. This has been real. You've had some great battles. I'm gonna miss it. But I look at this, I need to get back to my feet. I really, my wife and kids, they miss me. Yeah, I don't know how this all worked out, but again, I think this has a lot to do with the medieval legal codes that we have, that the idea of the 40 days a year. Now, in terms of limiting fighting, by the 11th century, the church had what was called the truce of God and the peace of God, which were prohibitions against attacking clergy, because I think that would be the height of rudeness. I mean, it's like, if I'm walking around, as I often do, and then I were a member of the clergy and some ruffian attacked me, well, you're held back. But the idea is that you would be protected by the peace of God. So if you are military, then you say, well, he's not part of us. We just attack fellow warriors. So this guy is praying, so we shouldn't beat up on him. That. So it's just a height of rudeness. Okay. You're not following civility. So the truce of God, basically during important periods like Lent and other special church times, from Friday to Sunday, basically until Monday morning. And Monday, man, I'm back at it. But yeah, during the special times, you got to stop. You can't fight. So that is the idea. And this is again, perhaps more something that it was on our wish list because the church tried to intervene in some feudal practices, but I suspect they did it as much in theory as they did in reality, not to criticize, but it's just the way it was. Now, ecclesiastical vassals, lords have lots of land. So there are churchmen, bishops and abbots, who become what we call ecclesiastical vassals. And the reason they make such wonderful vassals is we have those pesky younger brothers. And sometimes they can be useful if we have great estates. So we can make them bishops and such, because I told you about nepotism. And ecclesiastical vassals are very useful because when they die or retire, whichever comes first, they don't have any legitimate heirs. So the land gets freed up and we can give it to someone else. Because we all understand that the problems will become greater when heirs are involved. You say, but heirs, yeah, that's not part of the original feudal idea. But as I've said before, nepotism is inherent in any kind of system, isn't it? I mean, it's like, well, I got this, so why did my child get this? So that's what happens here. Because all these vassals have lands. And speaking of my Persian friends, I was thinking about many of the satraps who would have tried to establish, Junior as satrap after them. And the way that Persian kings avoided that was to transfer it. Yeah. Yeah. Because you got a limited term in this particular satrapy and you're moving on. Because if you don't, you nest there. And and then Junior's walking around in there and say, you know who my dad is? You're going to get it, man, if you don't do what I say. I mean, you think I make this stuff up? I don't. So that is what people do. And many times vassals demand that from their lords, and that will happen. So then when you have an ecclesiastical vassal, what if a bishop and abbot going to come along and say, Junior wants to get this? No, because Junior is not legitimate. You were a bad bishop. Bad, bad, bad. You did a no-no. And Junior's a no-no. Because you can't have, legitimate children. Legitimate heirs. And so I'm not saying they didn't illegitimate heirs, but according to the rules, if you want to call them rules, then they can't be inheritors. Now they can be, these bishops and abbots can be very effective lords. Oh yeah. And they're not going around. This isn't St. Francis of Assisi or something. These folks can be rough and tough, but they can't be ready to turn this over. So when the bishop or abbot, as I say, dies or retires, then we can bring in another vassal who may have some very, very interesting ideas. Meanwhile, of course, what if our knight is like really active, one of these alpha types, 24/7, feet here, feet there, I've got, could you imagine the stress level? We talk about stress today. Could you imagine these super active vassals who say, gosh, I don't know how much time I have for my feet over here. Well, you better find it because you are going to have responsibilities. And of course, that will become very, very important in these law codes. How do you do it? Well, the way they will do it is going to have very great consequences for the feudal world. Meanwhile, as I say, the abbots, bishops, and so forth tended to be very devoted to the church. I guess today we might say kissing up to or use other unkind terms because they were definitely suck ups because you said, but they're wouldn't they just love the Pope? Well, we'll talk more about that next time, but for right now, the Pope's a long way away and the King's a lot closer. And so who is our David? You get the David, don't you? Yeah, that David, the biblical David, yeah. And we love him to death. He's wonderful. We kiss him and hold him, and all of that is very big in this period. And so the idea is, remember, theoretically celibate. That's it. I'm not saying, it's just, it happens, but so piety, religious devotion, maybe not. But they can still be great vassals because they know where the butter is put on the bread, so to speak. Now we have something you have seen. I know some of you have. You've been there. You have probably have it. It's absolutely amazing to see it in person, isn't it? But I think you have to pay.
Yes, you do.
And it's not cheap. Okay. Well, yeah, but I just want you to understand if you go there, you're getting to see this. It's part of your Ollie program right here, right now. This is number 44. In case you're interested. This is the 44th part. And you say, why are you showing this? Because I just think Odo is so interesting. Odo is the one with the fingers up. He has his tonsure. He was the brother of William the Conqueror.
Half brother.
And yeah, I was going to explain it.
Oh, sorry.
They had the same mother. And he was a kiss up. And he had the position of Bishop of Bayeux. And then planning the Norman conquest, he became Earl of Kent. And you say, oh my gosh, was he torn between the two roles? No, he seemed to do real well with it. I don't know. Yeah, when the checks are coming in, I think you could be really comfortable. Yeah, because could you imagine all those lands? And you say, so you mean he wasn't a faithful son of the church? I think not. Rate my bishop, 1 star only. Yes. Poor. Okay. If you put the bishop's suggestion box, I think that guy's going down in terms of Bayeux, don't you? But the idea, and by the way, do you see that's Robert, William's son? I looked at that sword and I thought, gosh, I bet that hurt that fellow in the next panel. See that? Y'all see that? So much. Oh, ouch. Sir, do you realize you have that? I'm thinking, what on earth? But he was a nasty piece of work. But anyway, I'm not as interested in him as I am in, of course, Odo. And I'm not saying that it's because Odo loved William. I think Odo loved Odo. I think he loved him. I said they were in a love affair together. You know, self, you were wonderful. But he was not a devoted son of the church. And he had great positions, great authority, but that's a great example, I guess you'd say, of an ecclesiastical vassal, the most obvious I could think of. And particularly because, depending on whether he was in Normandy or England, we still got financial security, because that's both are very nice, because Kent down south, and that's a very nice area. And of course, we love Bayeux, Normandy. So we've said suzerain, but what are we going to do when we have multiple lords? Oh, Lord. Now we turn to the feudal law code. That's where liege homage comes from. And then you think with these multiple lords, I see you during, it's like if you were torn between all the classes and you have so many different, so you say your liege teacher, and which one do you go to? And it's like, in the case of liege homage, according to the legal authorities, it would mean that one lord was the top one. And the others were like, well, I serve you. I really care about you, but you're not top. And that hurts, but deal with it. Because I've got all these different lords. I know you've got that war plan, but I have another engagement that week. So here's what we're going to do. I'll send somebody to fight in my place. And you go, oh, we. So the idea being that liege homage means that you're always on call for your main lord. And the other lords, you'll have to have a substitute. Again, I would think that would hurt a lot of feelings. But I guess sensitivity and feudal world don't necessarily work together very well. But the idea of liege homage means that you can satisfy all the military requirements. Again, all we have to prove this is, of course, these law codes, which are very useful. And thank goodness for the church. We wouldn't have all this, the church. I always want to write stuff down. Because they say, we're here to serve. We're going to write all these regulations now. Now, your homage, how many different people do you have homage? And so that's how the liege, my liege lord, and everybody else, I guess they can call them secondary lords, but they are not my primary lord. So I'm doing that service, but it's not in person. I'll have somebody do it on my behalf. So that's the way it works, supposedly. So that's how do it. The vassal fights for the liege lord and sending the sub-vassal to fight. I know, can it get confusing if you were really busy and gosh, who have I got on schedule? I've got it on tap, and very busy. Now, how often did these ceremonies go on? Well, given the shortness of life in this period, you have to wonder how often, because every time there was a new lord or a new vassal, you couldn't say, well, Dad did that ceremony, so let's just carry it over. I don't think that was supposed to be. Now, sometime you could shall we say, procrastinate. And that would happen. Some of you may be aware that the English did this with the French during the 100 Years' War, and so because the English had some French lands, and so English kings would kind of slow it up and say, I want to get to it. Like, did you ever have a student who do that to make up a test? And they say, oh, I want to get to that maybe next week or mañana, whenever. The whole idea of slowing the process down. But that would happen. And the reason, of course, is there are going to be fees. Because you're not just getting in, you're going to have to pay an installation fee. We always think, really? Yes. Nothing is free. I hate to tell you that, but it's true, folks. I mean, they would, and again, I can believe that this was probably true. If there was a new Lord, you would have to go and say, sir, could we have an installation? He says, yes, we can. But I need a little something to grease my palm. Yeah. And that would be the same way on the other end. Now, the vassal could be a grown person, and the Lord could be like a little kid. So those things happen too. But regardless, there was a change. Now, this is called the relief. And again, this is another one of those terms that I've always thought it comes out of the legal system, the legal writings, the feudal relief it's called. And you say, who invents that? Whoever loves installation fees, right? Because that's feudal relief, yeah. Oh, and then you think cha-ching, people always think about ways to get it out of, you don't think? So next come the aids. And the aids, they have ordinary aids and extraordinary aids. And say, who determined that? The legal system. You say it's the system, it's the system. Have you heard people always about the system? Who thought up the system? Well, that's always interesting. I guess the clergy and the great lords at some time in these areas. Wedding of the eldest daughter, knighting of the eldest son, and the ransoming of the Lord, because lords tended to get captured. Why kill a lord? That's, if you can avoid it, don't do it. Just capture them, and somebody's got to pay for it. And these are aids. So you go around, I guess, and collect. I know. And those of you who had to do these kinds of, could we ask you to give a little bit? Yeah, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's like, but this is not that kind of voluntary thing. You're supposed to do this. And you say, well, who decides that? Well, it's in the law code. And that's basic when those happen. Now, if you've got a lot of daughters, don't even dream, exactly, don't even dream of saying number 2 gets a contribution. No, I think she better elope. Yeah, she better go to Vegas, baby, because we're not contributing to that band or open bar, none of that. You're on your own. You're on your own. But yeah, that's those supposedly, again, supposedly, are the aids, and then the extraordinary are negotiable. Meaning that I guess the Lord could come along and say, we haven't had a good war lately, and I am really hard up. I'm running short, and while Junior seems to be doing well, number 2 is not. I would really appreciate it if you could. That's an extraordinary though. So they can't make you, I mean, they could hurt you or maybe, yeah. I don't want to do anything that's rated R in this class, but you can get the idea that we can be hurtful or abusive and use some ugly language. But yeah, to try to get an aid out of you, but again, according to those law codes, they were negotiable. Could you imagine how complex this is? Well, I just always find that very interesting. So now we're ready for people who are consummations. Not like, yeah, no one that I know, but
Thanks.
yes, because since it is a relationship between Lord and vassal, if the vassal feels that the Lord has been unfair, unjust, he may decide to break it off. And this is called the diffidatio, the defiance. And apparently this was done in some sort of proclamation. I mean, it's not like you just don't show up one day. You know, they're having a war. Everybody looks around and says, well, where did he go? Why didn't he here? Didn't he hear nothing? I mean, I think it's got to be a big deal that he would not show up. In fact, he would be defiant, and being defiant, then you're sort of like in a heap of trouble. Let's put it that way. And then, of course, the idea of what if there is no legitimate male heir, then we have a term that's still used today as cheat. And that means there is not a proper heir to a fief, and therefore it reverts to the Lord. Now, it may have gone on for several generations, but that doesn't mean you say, I've got a little love baby here. Can the little no have it? Nope. It ain't working. So it's cheat, and we love as cheats because there are always people who need it. You know, other people saying, gosh, you think I could get the fee? You certainly can. It's free. It's open. Sound like a real estate, doesn't it? But that's the idea of as cheap, because could you, again, I just can't imagine the complexity of all of this. Just stop and think about it to understand how complicated this can be. Finally, if you think this is just going to be all male, it is, of course, male dominated, but let's face it, there wouldn't be a world without women. So the idea, of course, here is women in terms of their value, because they bring the estates of their parents as dowries, and of course they produce legitimate heirs because, yes, they're concubines, and we love those children too. But technically, in this particular world, you do not have rights as an illegitimate child. Now, are people who are illegitimate sometimes privileged? Well, William the Conqueror was. Yes, he was, they said, born on the wrong side of the bed, but that's all right. Do you think anybody said, well, you're a love child? No, I think they were saying, we want to do what you say. You know, it's not, yeah, because I don't think he would have appreciated any reference to his mother that was ugly. So all of that is to say that fathers, sons, brothers, even adult sons had authority over these women. But this is all theoretical. And I've come across examples of feudal women who actually did fealty and homage, even though they were not obviously going to fight. These are not Amazons or any idea that they're going to put on armor as some sort of, I guess in the movies they do that now, but this is not reality in terms of this particular world. They obviously don't fight. I say obviously because that's not the kind of world. It is interesting that how these noble women are often not going to be married a long time. Do I need to say that these husbands are short-termers? Because I wouldn't be writing a life insurance policy because, I mean, the odds of your making it say, oh, I can't wait till we get to retire and have to go over there. Don't think you need to worry about that because you'll be going bye-bye. So that means that often the women had to be in charge, take responsibility of lands and children and all the rest of it. And as such, many by their own lords would be forced to remarry. But those who could avoid it apparently tried to. And that's why you find many of these folks becoming abbesses of religious houses, which I find fascinating too, since they couldn't be upper clergy in the Catholic, well, there can't be any clergy, but yeah, I mean, think about it. But you could be abbess of a convent, and you don't have, I mean, you have to be celibate from then on. But the idea being that I can be a leader now, and no man, well, the man would come around as a priest, you know, to share the communion, but you know, nobody, no bossy old man telling me what to do. No husband, no father, not even Junior. You know, because that's what they were used to. But these religious houses became sites of some very powerful women. Chivalry, oh boy. Now, I know many of you probably had to read in literature classes from the works about Lancelot and Guinevere. And I had a student who once told me that she would be a great queen at some court if she lived in the Middle Ages. I would say, I think we need some cold water in that face. I just could not believe, well, I'm so non-romantic, but the idea is that between the church and this class of women, we seem to have developed ideas of these vassals. And I told you sometimes they were kind of hoodie thugs, but now we find they are valiant, loving, they care, people who need people. And you say, really? Well, that's what we would like. You know, this is the theory, the theory. Chivalry is all a theory, I think. And the church, as well as this class of upper class women, bravery, honor, truthfulness, courtesy, generosity, when they're holding out the collection plate, you hit it big time. So all of this, and much of this, of course, comes as a result of the spirit of the Crusades. If you really want to be a knight, go beat up the enemies of God. You know, that's the idea of being chivalrous. Do you love the ladies? Well, your wife you do, but you better behave yourself. You better not be lascivious. Love these words, yes. So the idea you're going to be brave and loyal. So you use your military in the right way. And the right way, of course, is to go to the Holy Land and beat up people in the Middle East, right? So, yeah, that's good. But is that what is meant by chivalry for these ladies? No, it's to serve us. And this, of course, comes about through the stories of the troubadours and the ideas of their gaining their true loyalty by the love of the lady who is not your wife, which is yucky. The idea, because it's got to be a far away and, you know, all the stories, but your wife, I mean, she has children, and I don't know, and all of that you associate with mortgages and dental payments and all of that. But this is, of course, involved in something glamorous and beautiful, and we see this as courtly love. To end then, two works, and again, they're cliff notes, but you're above that. Because I wouldn't think you would want to get them in the original. They're available on Amazon. So notice Penguin, although this was probably, what, $5, and that was probably a lot more than that. But the Song of Roland, the Song of Great Deeds has to do, of course, with Charlemagne's forces fighting against the Saracens. And of course, he will die killed by some perfidious Saracen. But do you think that will stop him? Nay. He would say, I'm just glad I got to serve. I love you, Charlemagne. I mean, it's not like, gosh, what about my benefits? What about, you know, am I going to get, you know, it's like, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah, where's the GI Bill in it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, the courtly love. And you see, of course, Lancelot and Guinevere, and you think, how could something so wrong be so right? Yeah, exactly. That's your courtly love. And you say, oh, you mean it's lascivious, lurid, pure. Okay, it's beautiful. Are they ever going to be married? I think not. But it's so much the idea of love. And why does Lancelot do this? Because she is the center. She is for whom he is the vassal's love. But you say, but wouldn't Arthur object? Oh, yeah. But you see, that's what makes it all so beautiful. And you think, probably this is fiction. I'm thinking it is definitely fiction, because in the real world, people often say, did this actually happen? There are plenty of people who have affairs, I'll grant you. But that doesn't mean that this is not romanticized. In fact, I'm thinking that if you had been the queen and you had been stepping out, you would have been in a heap of trouble, okay? Men may do it, but I think that's what you call, double standard. I believe they call it that. Yeah. So you understand then that the queen had to follow a very, very different kind of feeling. So these are, as far as I'm concerned, fiction based on some degree of fact. And yes, there are ideas that are true based on the legal system that we know about. But this is romantic and in fact comes from later periods. And looking back like we do sometimes in depicting events from decades past, right? We tend to romanticize or make it a lot more interesting than it really is, the reality. So that's the feudal world, and we'll pick it up there next week. Please come back. Thank y'all. Let's hope it'll be
Warmer.
warmer. Yes, but